Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a Texas veteran returns home to find a towering luxury billboard illegally built on his land, he doesn't call a lawyer, he grabs his tools. What follows is a viral high-stakes war against a corrupt HOA that tried to steal more than just property. They tried to steal silence. I came back from Austin late in the afternoon, dust still clinging to the tires, the sun hanging low over El Paso County like it always does when it wants to remind you who really owns the sky out here. 5 acres of quiet usually greeted me. Fencing, mesquite, the long gravel drive curving toward my house. That day, something felt wrong before I could even put it into words. The horizon looked crowded. I slowed the truck near the highway edge of my land, squinting through the windshield. At first, my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. Then it clicked, hard enough to make my jaw tighten. There was a massive billboard planted right on the edge of my property, towering over the drainage culvert like some kind of steel parasite. Bright colors, floodlights, fresh concrete still pale against the dirt. 35 feet tall, easy. You don't miss something like that unless you're blind or dead. I pulled over and got out. The closer I walked, the worse it got. The sign screamed luxury in glossy letters. Horizon Range Estates. New homes from $1.5 million. Private security, join us. It was angled perfectly toward the highway, designed to hijack every passing driver's attention, and it was sitting squarely on land that I owned, paid for, surveyed, and defended with paperwork thicker than a phone book. The ground around it was chewed up by heavy equipment, deep tire tracks, broken brush, temporary plastic fencing with the HOA logo zip-tied to it like a flag planted in enemy territory. The concrete base had been poured directly over part of the water runoff system I had permitted years ago. Anyone with half a brain and a permit would know that was a serious problem. Whoever did this either didn't care or assumed I wouldn't push back. I stood there for a long moment, hands on my hips, letting the anger settle into something colder and more useful. First thing I did was check my phone and pull up my security app. Every camera along that side of the property showed a neat black screen with a cheerful little message telling me the system was offline due to temporary interruption. Temporary my ass. The timestamps lined up perfectly with my trip. Whoever did this knew when I'd be gone, and they knew exactly what they were doing. I walked the perimeter, taking photos from every angle, noting serial numbers on the metal beams, the type of bolts used, the fresh paint still smelling like money and bad decisions. No permit tags, no city markings, nothing that said this had gone through any legal channel. Just brute force, confidence, and entitlement bolted together in steel and concrete. On the plastic fencing, the logo was unmistakable. Horizon Range Estates Homeowners Association. I laughed once, short and humorless. I didn't belong to any HOA. Never had. My land sat outside their boundaries, and that fact had been tested more than once by developers who wanted what they couldn't have. Every time, the answer had been no. I drove to the entrance of their community, rolled down my window, and asked the board security guard who authorized construction on my land. He didn't look surprised. That told me more than his silence ever could. He said he was just following instructions and suggested I contact the board. I asked which board member had signed off. He shrugged, eyes sliding away, and repeated the line like a trained parrot. Back home, I poured a coffee and sat on the porch, staring at that billboard as the sun dipped behind it, casting a long shadow straight across my field. The quiet I'd built my life around had been violated without so much as a knock on the door. No letter, no call, no negotiation, just a structure dropped onto my property like I wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight. I thought about the cameras being down, about the timing, about how much concrete and steel cost, and how confident someone had to be to pour it on land they didn't own. Whoever was behind this didn't see me as an obstacle. They saw me as empty space. They were wrong. The next morning, I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't email the city. I called Brett Randall. I hadn't served with Brett for over a decade, but we'd never really stopped being in the same foxhole, even if now it was just over bourbon and bad politics. He answered on the first ring, like he was waiting for the call. I didn't even have to explain much. They dropped a 35-foot sign on my land, Brett. Concrete steel. Horizon Range HOA. There was a pause, then a chuckle. Well, hell jazz. I hope they didn't scratch the culvert. They poured over it. Another pause. Then, Give me 4 hours. By 5:30 that evening, Brett's old diesel flatbed came rattling up my driveway, hauling a portable lift, gas-powered angle grinders, and a pair of steel cables thick enough to choke a truck. We got to work just as the sun started sliding behind the horizon. Not for symbolic reasons, it's just easier to work when the HOA patrols aren't watching. But we made damn sure the cameras were. We started with the support braces, cutting the welds one at a time. The billboard hummed slightly in the wind, a low, angry sound. Every slice of steel echoed across the field. We didn't talk much. Just the rhythm of metal against metal, bolts popping, steel groaning like it knew it was about to fall. By the time we dropped the top frame onto the truck bed, we were both sweating through our shirts. I climbed up and spray painted over the gaudy lettering with a message of my own. Trespass this, and see what happens. A bit much, maybe, but cathartic as hell. We didn't stop until every bolt, every support beam, and every chunk of foundation that could be lifted was loaded. The cement base we couldn't fully remove, but Brett had brought a jackhammer. We cracked the edges and left it jagged and useless. Around 10:30 that night, I pulled my truck down to the gated entrance of Horizon Range Estates with the flatbed trailer in tow. No security guard this time, just 2 columns of brick and a motion light. I backed the trailer up to their front gate, got out, and dumped the entire load, metal debris, bolts, concrete chunks, right there in front of their "Welcome to our luxury community" sign. Then I zip-tied a laminated sign to their decorative fence. I'd printed it at home in big black letters: violation of Texas Penal Code, criminal trespass. This is your final warning. Underneath, I taped a printout of my property deed with the boundaries highlighted in neon yellow. On the way back, I posted the footage. Brett had filmed the entire thing, from the first cut to the final dump. It took less than 10 minutes to upload. By the time I took a shower, the video was already climbing past 20,000 views. I didn't even have to add music. The screech of the grinder was soundtrack enough. The title? How to Remove an Illegal HOA Billboard from Your Private Land, Texas Style. By dawn, I had voicemails from 3 local news stations, a property rights podcast, and some guy in Arizona who wanted to send me a bottle of whiskey and an American flag. The comments were full of people saying things like, "This man is a legend," and "This is how you handle Karens with clipboards." I didn't smile. Not really. But I won't lie, it felt good to make noise on my own terms. Around noon, an email landed in my inbox from someone named Karen Cresswell, HOA president. Subject line, legal notice, destruction of property. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I'd already seen the headline from the local news. Veteran dismantles unauthorized HOA billboard on private land. Video goes viral. They wanted to make this a fight? Fine. I wasn't just ready. I was armed, documented, and apparently trending. I woke up to the sound of my dog barking, not the usual bark, the sharp, short kind she saves for things that don't belong. I got up barefoot on cold tile and stepped outside. No cars, no voices, just a faint metallic rattle like something had brushed the fence. I scanned the perimeter. Nothing, but my gut said otherwise. By the time I finished my coffee, the first knock came. A courier in a cheap suit handed me a stiff envelope marked "Official Legal Notice. Immediate action required." I didn't even need to open it to guess who sent it. I opened it anyway. Inside, 3 pages of lawyer speak from Horizon Range Estates HOA, signed by none other than Karen Cresswell. They were suing me in the El Paso County District Court for destruction of community property, intentional infliction of reputational harm, and interference with residential infrastructure. The numbers were laughable if they weren't so. Insulting. They wanted $150,000 in damages for the billboard, another $25,000 for restoration of public trust, and a permanent injunction to prevent me from disrupting future community development adjacent to Horizon Range. I read it twice, then laughed out loud. Not because it was funny. It wasn't. It was pure theater, power play, threat posture, classic HOA. But that wasn't all. That same evening, I found a note folded and tucked under the windshield wiper of my truck. No envelope, just black marker, sharp and jagged. "We know where you sleep. Watch your cameras." There's a tone people use when they're just trying to scare you. This wasn't that. This was colder, calculated. I went straight to the system logs. Sure enough, the eastern line of cameras had gone dark again the night before. This time, not from inside. Someone had physically cut the line along the back fence. I found the cut the next morning. Clean. Professional, same spot the billboard crew had parked their rig. The next blow came 48 hours later. My dog, Delta, started vomiting late at night. I rushed her to the vet, and they told me she had ingested a toxic compound, likely rat poison mixed into meat. The vet found fragments of raw chicken and what looked like blue-green crystals. Someone had thrown it over my fence. It was personal now. I filed a police report, and the vet took a toxicology sample. Delta survived, but barely. I stopped sleeping. The next day, I pulled out the backup equipment from my old company's inventory. If they wanted to escalate, I would oblige. I installed motion-triggered cameras with autonomous power supply, dug in thermal sensors at both entrance paths, and deployed a series of decoy booby traps. Non-lethal, legal, but scary enough to make trespassers rethink their life choices. Flashbang simulators, pressurized air poppers, and a tripwire that set off floodlights and sent an alert to my phone. I also installed hidden microphones in the trees along the shared property line. I wasn't just defending the land anymore. I was documenting every inch of it. I met with my new attorney 2 days later, Aisha Delgado, ex-JAG, now working federal land cases. She went through the HOA's lawsuit with a smirk and then a snort. No jurisdiction, no standing, no legal leg to stand on. I liked her already. We filed a response within 24 hours, denying every claim and demanding a full dismissal with prejudice. But Aisha wasn't just playing defense. She started digging. Permits, ownership records, anything to tie Horizon Range to criminal activity. Meanwhile, my phone kept lighting up. Unknown numbers blocked calls, voicemails with breathing and silence. One of them just whispered, "You think you're untouchable." That was when I told Aisha we were past cease and desist territory. This was coordinated harassment, maybe worse. We installed a mobile server to back up all footage, including license plate captures, and she connected me to a private digital investigator who started tracking patterns from the IP addresses connected to the HOA's public posts. Then one morning, I opened my mailbox and found a fake flyer, glossy, professionally printed, a photo of my face, probably pulled from the viral video, with the headline, "Radical Militant Threatens Family Neighborhood, Community in Fear." It was stuffed in every mailbox on my road. Whoever was behind this didn't just want me sued. They wanted me broken, isolated, intimidated. I stood at the edge of my driveway that morning, looking down the road at a dozen homes, wondering how many believed what they'd read. My land was under siege, and the war had officially started. By the end of the week, my property felt more like a forward operating base than a home. Surveillance poles with pan-tilt-zoom lenses bordered the perimeter. The tripwires had been upgraded with RFID pingbacks. Even the mailbox had a discreet GoPro bolted inside it, streaming to a local drive in my basement. Anyone who so much as breathed near my land was now part of the record. I wasn't paranoid. I was methodical, because they had made it clear this wasn't just about a billboard. It was about breaking me. Aisha, my attorney, showed up in person the following Monday, legal pads in one hand, tablet in the other, black coffee in both. She wasn't smiling. "They faked the permit," she said as soon as I opened the door. "The one they filed with the county building office? Total fabrication. I compared it line by line with official forms." She handed me her tablet. I looked at the PDF, a permit request supposedly signed by a Lawrence Jacobson county inspector. There was just one problem. Lawrence Jacobson had died in 2017. Public record, obituary still online. They attached a digital signature of a man who's been dead for over 5 years. She said, "That's not just sloppy. That's felony-level fraud." It got worse. The contractor listed on the permit, a company called Sun West Display Solutions, was a ghost. No license, no registration, no physical office, just a disconnected number and a mailbox drop in Las Cruces. Aisha's P. I ran a scan through LexisNexis and found one payment made to the company through an HOA corporate credit account. That account was managed by none other than Karen Cresswell. We were finally connecting names to crimes. Brett and I reviewed the drone footage from the night the billboard went up. The neighbor 2 lots over had let us fly one of Brett's recon drones over the area during the installation window. We found it on the second pass, 2 pickup trucks, 1 white SUV, all unmarked, but the license plate of the SUV was caught for half a second as it turned into the access path. We ran it through a plate lookup service. registered to a James Cresswell, husband of Karen Cresswell, former security contractor, dishonorably discharged after a workplace harassment complaint, and the same man who, according to IP tracebacks, had been responsible for 2 of the anonymous threatening voicemails sent to my number. We brought all of this to the county sheriff's office. Aisha came with a thick binder of compiled evidence, timestamps, property records, drone footage, even the note that had been slipped under my windshield. The deputy who took our report was quiet for most of it. Then he called in a detective from their white-collar unit. That was when I knew we had moved past neighborhood drama. The detective, a man named Rourke, went through the permit page, looked at the dead inspector's name, and let out a low whistle. "You're telling me the HOA president personally submitted this forged document?" he asked. Aisha didn't flinch. "We're telling you she signed the check, sent the trucks, and her husband dropped the first bucket of concrete. Everything else is supporting evidence." Rourke nodded slowly and said 5 words that flipped the entire momentum. "I'm looping in the DA. Back at home, I doubled the storage capacity of the server. Brett upgraded the drone with night vision. Aisha drafted a countersuit, not just for trespassing, but for property damage, attempted poisoning of a domestic animal, cyberstalking, and civil conspiracy. Then came the icing on the cake. We received an anonymous tip through an encrypted email. Someone claiming to be a concerned HOA member sent us a cache of internal emails between Karen and the board. In one chain, dated 2 weeks before the billboard appeared, Karen wrote, "We can't get him to sell, so we're going around him. He's got no one on that land. If it goes up while he's gone, by the time he's back, it'll be too late. Once the sign's there, the optics are ours." In another, she bragged that the cameras are a joke. "I had James test the blind spots last year. Brett nearly broke the table when he read that. I didn't. I just sat there, staring at the screen. Because now it wasn't just property. It wasn't even just sabotage. It was premeditated. The attack came on a Wednesday night, sometime after 2 a.m., when even the coyotes had gone silent. I was awake, not because I couldn't sleep, but because I didn't try anymore. I was on the porch, boots up on the rail, sipping coffee that had long gone cold, when I caught the faintest flicker of movement near the utility shed on the east side of the property. At first, I thought it was one of the motion lights catching a jackrabbit. Then the flames rose. I dropped the mug and sprinted. The shed was burning, not fully engulfed yet, but fast. The flames were dancing along the sidewall like they knew they didn't have long. My security feed caught it all. Thermal cams, night vision, time-stamped in full 4K glory. Someone had poured gasoline at the base of the shed and lit it with a fuse. They didn't know about the fire suppressant system Brett helped me install last month. CO2 foam injectors rigged into the corners of the shed. It activated within seconds of the fire peaking. The flames hissed, then collapsed in on themselves. But I'd seen enough combat to know what this was. This wasn't vandalism. This was escalation. By the time the sheriff's unit arrived, I already had the footage downloaded to a USB drive and a copy uploading to cloud storage. The fire was out. The air still stank of fuel and melted plastic. The responding deputy looked around, muttered, "Jesus," and immediately called in the detective unit. I showed them the video. A masked figure, hoodie and gloves, approaching from the tree line. No hesitation. Methodical. They moved like someone who had done this before. Then came the part that made my skin crawl. When the arsonist turned to run, the camera at the southeast gate caught a partial plate on the getaway van. Black Dodge Ram ProMaster, back panel dented on the driver's side. Aisha ran it through a private search, using a law enforcement contact she trusted. It had been rented 2 days earlier in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Rented under a corporate account belonging to Valence Protective Services. The company? Formerly owned by James Cresswell. I drove straight to the sheriff's office the next morning. This was no longer civil harassment or trespassing. This was an organized attack with deadly potential. They called in the feds. Within 72 hours, an agent from the El Paso field office of the FBI showed up at my door. Young guy, clean suit, zero expression. "Mr. Cole, I'm Agent Valdez. I understand you've had some trouble." I handed him a binder, everything we'd compiled so far. He flipped through it slowly, pausing at the drone photos, the falsified permit, the email from the so-called concerned HOA member. When he got to the fire footage, he stopped, looked up and said, "This isn't just HOA overreach. This is conspiracy and attempted arson with federal implications. You're dealing with something coordinated." That evening, my land turned into a crime scene. FBI agents in plainclothes walked the perimeter, flagged evidence markers near the ignition point, and collected samples of the fuel residue. Brett handed over the drone with the thermal recordings. We gave them login access to our server and backups. At the same time, Agent Valdez executed a federal request to pull metadata from Karen Cresswell's HOA email accounts. He also ordered a freeze on James Cresswell's financial records. Within a day, they found the purchase logs, 2 5-gallon gas cans, fuse cords, and nitrile gloves, all bought in cash from a hardware store 2 towns over. The timestamp matched the night before the fire. Security footage showed a man matching James's height and build. They hadn't just crossed the line, they'd taken a blowtorch to it. Then came another twist. Agent Valdez brought in phone ping data. At the exact time of the fire, James's phone had been turned off, but a burner phone registered to a fake name had pinged off a tower less than 1 mile from my house. The same burner had sent 3 anonymous texts the week prior to my number. All signs pointed in the same direction. Karen Cresswell hadn't just violated property law, she had weaponized her resources, legal, social, and now physical, to try and force me into submission. Aisha began reworking our countersuit into a coordinated civil and criminal action. Arson, conspiracy to commit bodily harm, cyberstalking, harassment, and misuse of HOA funds. We requested a court order to freeze the HOA's financial accounts before they could shift money into private holdings, but the Cresswells weren't done yet. 2 nights later, someone threw a rock through the rear window of my truck. No note this time, just the sound of glass and a taillight blinking in the dark. I stayed awake with the shotgun on my lap and my boots on. My phone kept buzzing. Comments, messages, news alerts. The story had gone national. Veteran targeted by rogue HOA. FBI investigating El Paso billboard war. They had tried fire. Now they were going to feel heat of their own. The day of the first hearing arrived under a sky so clean it felt disrespectful. I wore a suit I hadn't touched in years. Military cut still sharp, pressed shirt tucked like I was heading into inspection. Aisha looked like wore in heels. Brett showed up in a dark blue button-down, sleeves rolled like he was fixing to carry a body out of a trench. None of us smiled. El Paso County Courthouse stood like a sandstone fortress downtown, flanked by palm trees and pigeons who didn't give a damn about justice. Inside, the courtroom smelled like sweat, old wood, and bad lies. Karen Cresswell sat at the petitioner's table in a beige pantsuit, too stiff for Texas heat, flanked by a pair of suits who looked like they charged by the comma. Her husband James wasn't present. The FBI had made sure of that. Judge Alvarez, sharp-eyed and stone-voiced, took her seat and scanned the room like a sniper. Let's begin. Karen's lawyers opened with theatrics, talking about community vision, long-term infrastructure plans, and how my aggressive dismantling of the billboard caused irreparable harm to Horizon Range's public image. Aisha stood and responded like a woman unbothered by noise. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady, "my client resides on land that is not under Horizon Range jurisdiction. The billboard was erected without permit, without consent, and using forged documentation by a person who is currently under federal investigation for arson and harassment." You could hear a pin drop or a soul deflate. Judge Alvarez leaned forward. "Do you have evidence of forgery?" Aisha slid a folder across the bench. Inside, the fake permit, the dead inspector's identity, the metadata logs, payment receipts, and a sworn affidavit from the drone pilot confirming the date and time of installation. Karen's expression didn't flinch, but her knuckles turned white on the table. And what about these threats and the alleged fire? That's when Aisha really went to work. She presented the video footage from the arson attempt, played it for the court, showed the burner phone's metadata, the gas can purchases, the link to Valence Protective Services, the financial record trail that ended with James Cresswell. The judge stopped the playback and looked over her glasses at Karen. "Are you aware that your husband is under federal investigation?" Karen's lawyer objected. Judge Alvarez overruled it immediately. "We are now dealing with a federal criminal investigation," she said. "And if this court finds any link between this HOA's leadership and criminal activity, the petition for damages will not only be dismissed, but this association may face sanctions under state and federal law." That was the beginning of the end. The following week, subpoenas were issued to multiple Horizon Range board members. One of them flipped. He provided internal emails confirming that not only was Karen aware of the billboard's placement, she orchestrated it. She approved funds, over $12,000, paid in cash withdrawals and disguised under vague budget entries like community enhancements. More dominoes fell. A former HOA treasurer came forward under threat of subpoena, admitting that Karen had diverted reserve funds to pay the unlicensed contractor. That same contractor, when contacted by federal agents, lawyered up and cut a deal, implicating both Cresswell's and 2 other board members in multiple violations of state building codes, false representation, and property trespass. The court scheduled a formal hearing to determine damages. We came in with a countersuit that could fill a library shelf. On the day of the hearing, Karen tried one last move, an emergency motion to delay the proceedings, claiming mental distress due to online harassment and media exposure. The judge denied it. "I have reviewed over 200 pages of evidence," Judge Alvarez said. "What you and your organization did was not only unlawful, it was calculated and malicious. Mr. Cole acted within his rights, and given the threats, the arson attempt, and the falsified permits, this court sees fit to rule decisively." Then she looked directly at Karen. "This court hereby orders the immediate arrest of Karen Cresswell for perjury, falsification of documents, and obstruction of justice in connection to an ongoing federal investigation." Gasps rolled through the courtroom. Karen stood slowly, blinking, as the bailiff approached. Her lawyers didn't move. Her mask cracked just a bit when the handcuffs clicked shut. And as for Horizon Range Estates HOA, the judge continued, "This body is hereby fined $250,000 for misuse of funds and ordered to compensate Mr. Cole in the amount of $500,000 for property damage, emotional distress, and legal costs incurred as a result of your unlawful actions." It wasn't over. The judge turned to Aisha and nodded. "Federal authorities will continue their investigation. Mr. Cole, you may be contacted by the U.S. Attorney's Office for further testimony." Outside the courthouse, a media frenzy was already waiting. I didn't speak. I didn't wave. I walked to my truck and drove straight home, where the bulletproof glass on my new rear window gleamed under the sun. That night, Agent Valdez called. They found 4 more properties where Horizon Range had installed unauthorized structures while the owners were on vacation, he said. Same MO. No permits, no consent, fake documentation. "This goes deeper than we thought." He paused, then added, "You may have cracked something bigger than you know." I hung up and looked out at the tree line where the fire had once flickered. There were no shadows now, just security lights humming and Delta snoozing near the porch steps, whole and alive. For the first time in months, I slept. 2 days after the hearing, a moving truck pulled up to the gates of Horizon Range Estates. It was early morning, sun just peeking over the horizon, casting long shadows down the rows of uniform houses and chemically perfect lawns. I watched through my binoculars from the ridge behind my property, coffee in hand, dog at my side. That truck was the first of many. By the end of the week, no fewer than 13 families had put up for sale signs in their yards. Some of them were the same neighbors who'd supported the HOA's moves for years. Others, I later learned, had no idea what the board had been doing until the FBI started showing up with warrants and questions. Horizon Range wasn't just unraveling, it was hemorrhaging. Karen's arrest had been replayed on every local and state news station, and it didn't take long before national outlets picked it up. Cable news anchors debated the legality of HOA overreach. Property Rights Podcast dissected every line of the lawsuit. Even Reddit got involved. Someone posted a full breakdown of the case under r/legal advice, and it hit the front page in hours. I didn't ask for any of it, but I wasn't hiding from it either. The no trespassing, no HOA movement took off like a brush fire. People from all over Texas and Arizona began messaging me, sharing photos of their own run-ins with abusive associations. Someone started selling t-shirts with my face and the words, "Not in my backyard." Proceeds went to a veterans legal defense fund. I didn't authorize it, but I wasn't mad either. Then came the veterans. At first, it was just Brett and a couple of old friends who wanted to help clean up the damage on my land, patching the scorched siding, reinforcing the fencing, helping to rewire the underground lines. But soon, more started showing up. Some were guys I hadn't seen since Fallujah. Others I didn't know at all. Strangers who came out because they'd heard my story and wanted to stand on soil that hadn't been surrendered. We built something, slowly. A permanent shooting range on the east side of the property, designed by Brett and funded by donations I never asked for. Targets were welded out of the old BILLBOARD scrap metal, poetic justice 10 millimeters thick. The foundation stone bore an inscription, in memory of boundaries they tried to steal. We called it the line, and anyone who trained there knew why. The sheriff's office formally closed its local investigation, handing everything over to the feds. James Cresswell was indicted on 6 counts, including attempted arson and conspiracy to commit property crimes. His bail was denied. Karen, still awaiting trial, tried to issue a public statement from jail, calling herself a victim of political persecution and media distortion. No one listened. The HOA's board officially voted to dissolve the organization, not out of goodwill, but because the insurance company pulled their liability coverage. Meanwhile, Aisha had become something of a celebrity in her own right. She gave a talk at the University of Texas School of Law titled "When Communities Overreach: The Legal Wall Around Private Property." She even asked me to join her as a guest speaker. I declined. But I did testify before the Texas Legislative Committee on Land Use and Zoning. I stood in front of a panel of state lawmakers in starched collars and told them, in plain terms, how close I came to losing everything because someone with a clipboard and a grudge decided their community image mattered more than my legal rights. One of the bills that came out of that hearing, Cole's Law, it barred HOAs from extending influence beyond their defined borders, made falsifying construction permits a felony with mandatory prison time, and required third-party audits of HOA financials in any neighborhood with more than 25 homes. In other words, it made sure this wouldn't happen again. Not to me. Not to anyone. Back home, the land breathed. The burned shed had been rebuilt stronger. The fences stood higher, cameras sharper. My dog Delta trotted along the boundary line like she owned the world, because here we did. And the billboard, gone. Just a patch of disturbed dirt where it once stood, now overgrown with wild grass. I didn't erase the scar. I let it stay visible. As a reminder, the footage of the billboard teardown still circulates every few months. Last I checked, it had over 14 million views across platforms. The top comment reads, "This man just dismantled authoritarianism with a wrench and a camera." I don't know about that, but I do know I took back what was mine, and I didn't ask permission. Winter rolled in slow that year. Texas doesn't do snow the way people imagine. It creeps in, with wind that bites more than it freezes, sky the color of old steel, and silence that drapes over the land like an old military blanket. It had been almost 4 months since the arrest, 3 since the HOA officially disbanded, and about 2 since I last heard the name Karen Cresswell spoken aloud. But some fights don't end when the gavel falls. They fade into the background until something stirs them up again. I got a call one morning from Agent Valdez. His voice was calm, clipped, the way it always was, but I could tell something had shifted. "We finished combing through the rest of the Cresswell files," he said. "There's more." More turned out to be a string of communications between Karen and a development firm out of Houston, Marantha Growth Partners, a company known for flipping rural properties into luxury tracts. The emails suggested Horizon Range had been quietly working with Marantha to encourage transition of surrounding parcels, meaning forced sales, quiet pressure, weaponized code enforcement. My parcel was only step 1. It didn't matter anymore. The firm cut ties after the lawsuit, and with Karen awaiting sentencing, the plan had imploded. But it made it crystal clear I hadn't just been defending my land. I'd been standing in the way of a machine. "You drew a line, Mr. Cole," Valdez said, and they ran into it full speed. Karen eventually took a plea deal, 8 years, federal custody. James got 5, suspended to 2.5 with probation, mostly because his lawyers blamed everything on his wife and PTSD. I didn't care. I wasn't looking for vengeance, just resolution. In March, the state invited me back, this time to Austin, to stand beside a row of lawmakers in suits and dresses who shook my hand like they were thanking me for something heroic. They signed the final vote on Cole's Law right there in front of the press. I kept my words short. This law's not for me. It's for everyone who thinks peace and privacy are worth defending. I meant it. Back home, spring had started to color the hills again. The range was busy. We ran community training days now, not just for veterans, but for local ranchers, off-grid families, even a few college kids who wanted to learn firearm safety without judgment. Brett handled most of it. He was better at people than he liked to admit. I found my rhythm again. I rebuilt the east fence from reclaimed cedar, upgraded the generator system, planted a few native pines along the perimeter that'd take years to grow. But I liked the idea that something would outlast me. One afternoon, a man showed up at my gate, mid-50s, hands calloused, nerves shot. He introduced himself as Alan Prendergast, owner of a 5-acre plot outside of Midland. "Saw your story," he said. "Thought I was crazy for what they tried to pull on me." We talked for 2 hours. I gave him a thumb drive full of documents, the legal roadmap Aisha and I had built, forms, contact templates, even camera recommendations. He left lighter than when he came, and he wasn't the last. By summer, I'd helped 6 other landowners fight back against bad faith HOAs or shady developers. I didn't ask for money. I didn't form a business. But people kept showing up. Men and women who were tired of being told their land didn't belong to them unless it fit someone else's plan. I kept a wall in the workshop, a pegboard covered in photos, notes, and letters from folks I'd helped. I labeled it "The Line Continued" because that's what it was. One night, Delta barked again, the same sharp bark from that night long ago. I stepped out, flashlight sweeping across the trees. Nothing there, just the wind moving through the pines. Just a man on his land, free and awake. No banners, no boards, no permissions asked, and no more fences coming from the outside.